So ever since PT shocked the world in 2014, horror walking simulators have been on the rise for better or worse. While some of them surpassed the game that inspired them, like Visage, others failed to capture the same feelings and vibes as PT did over a decade ago. Luto is another game that fits into the mold, and on today's episode of Nerdspace Games, I'll be talking about this psychological horror walking simulator as I give you guys my brutally honest thoughts about how this game compares to other games in the genre. Before that though, if you haven't already, subscribe for more updates on survival horror games. Also hit that like button if you found this video helpful at all. Finally, this video is sponsored by G Fuel. Support Nerdspace Games by picking up your favorite flavor of G Fuel using the link in the description or the discount code Nerdspace Games at checkout. Anyway, without further ado, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games and this is my review on the psychological horror game Luto. Let's get it. So like most games within this genre, Luto starts off with the player waking up inside of their home and exploring the same halls and rooms over and over again trying to find a way out. However, this psychological horror game takes a turn for the worse as the harder you try to find your way out of this house, the deeper you dive into the darkness that awaits you. I know I started this video off comparing this game to other horror walking simulators like BT, Visage, and Layers of Fear. But here's the thing, it's actually quite different from typical games of this genre. Sure, you still have all of the traditional traits involved in this game that you would expect from most horror walking simulators. First person, photorealistic visuals, immersive environment that interacts with your actions as you explore, and jump scares to keep you on your toes. However, where Luto differs from those games is the way it builds on the psychological horror elements of the game. I can't really dive into much of the mechanics and story of the game without spoiling the plot, but let's just say that the game really leans into a unique take on the genre that actually makes it stand out more than your typical horror walking simulator. For one, you have a narrator throughout the entire game. I'll be real with you, at first the narrator kind of annoyed me and I thought it was such a bad feature in the game. But as the story goes on, you start to kind of appreciate it more and you kind of understand the logic of introducing this mechanic to the game. Speaking of which, it's worth noting that the first hour of the game is definitely the hardest to get through. I ran into a bug or two earlier on in the game and the story dragged on at first within that first hour. However, once you made it deeper into the main plot of the game, things really picked up and I found myself really impressed with everything that this game had to offer. From the story to the puzzles to the theme of the game. Speaking of the story, I have to say that this is without a doubt one of the more interesting stories I've experienced in a psychological horror game. It may not hit the same highs as Silent Hill or games like Mouthwashing, but the way it handles some of the themes it addresses throughout the game is both unnerving and wholesome in a way that you don't really expect it at all. The scare factor is definitely present here, especially in the second half of the game. Instead of throwing you into the horror from start to finish, Luto does a fantastic job at building up the tension throughout the entire game. I'll admit it started off slow at first with the scare factor, but once you started to see more of the people covered in sheets appear more often and move around more often, a feeling of dread would fill your entire soul every time you see one just standing in the room by you. I can't tell you how many times I freaked out just walking past them, expecting them to jump out at me and move as soon as I got close to them. I will say that the scare factor doesn't really hit the same highs as other horror games though. Like, I wouldn't come into this game and expect to be as scared as you were when you were playing Visage or PT. I think the main horror of this game comes from some of the themes explored later in the game and the feeling of anxiety that you get with the atmosphere and the environment itself rather than the typical jump scares that you would expect in most games like this one. Now, that doesn't mean that there's absolutely zero jump scares in this game though. In fact, there's actually a good amount of them. I just wouldn't expect as many or as intense as you would see in other horror games of the same genre. There's a lot that I really want to say about this game, but I'm honestly having a lot of trouble expressing my favorite parts about this game without spoiling key moments and details about the story. So instead, I'll say this. If you like a psychological horror game that explores a unique perspective, you will enjoy this game. If you like a story that'll make you question everything and provide something that is so trippy that you have to sit and think about it long after the credits roll, then this game is for you. And if you want something that'll test your resolve and scare you in non-traditional ways versus your typical jump scares that you might be used to from other horror walking simulators, then Luto will impress you for sure. With all that being said, this game is not without its flaws. As I said earlier, there were some bugs I ran into that forced me to restart my game and get it working again. One example is a puzzle that involves using a phone number to solve. I had the right number, but for some reason the phone lost its dial tone, and no matter how many times I put the number in, it just wouldn't work. But thankfully, once I restarted the game, this issue was resolved. And I'm sure after a few patches here and there, this game will be completely bug-free at some point. And I also kind of mentioned this at the start of today's video, but the game has an extremely slow start. That's to be expected with games in this genre though, as it needs to set the premise of the game while also building tension over time. However, I think there's not enough scare factor involved in that opening hour, and at times I question it being a horror game until things really started to pick up after that first hour. Like that first hour, I was on the fence of giving it a 5 or a 6 if it continued at the pace it was going at, but thankfully that immediately changed once things started to pick up. So trust me, don't give up on this game right away because there's so much good in this game, but you have to get through that slow opening to fully appreciate it. But with all that being said, let's just get to the final verdict. Luto is a great psychological horror game that starts off slow and has a few bugs at the start, but builds tension over time, making it one of the most trippy, mind-blowing, and intense psychological horror games that I've played in a long time. Some of the moments left me completely blown away, and things that annoyed me at first, like the narrator, ultimately became one of my favorite parts of the game by the time the credits rolled. It's one of those games that you need to experience if you're a psychological horror fan and you enjoy games that really challenge you in extremely unexpected ways. It has its share of puzzles and scares, but not in the ways that you would expect. It has one of the better psychological horror stories ever, with important themes front and center, but explored in a way that you haven't seen before. So with all of that in mind, I give Luto a 9 out of 10. Honestly, this game was phenomenal, and at the time of recording this video, it's my horror game of the year so far. Seriously, I love this game, and if you enjoyed games like Visage, Doki Doki Literature Club, and other psychological horror walking simulators, I promise you, you'll be happy with this game, trust me. That's it for today's episode of Nerdspace Games. Hopefully you found this review helpful, and if you did, consider dropping a like on today's video and sharing it with your friends and family. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.